Alright, so this lesson I really actually combined two that College Board put out. So we're looking at graphs of sine and cosine. The x-axis represents and the y represents the sine or the cosine. And you can, in your calculator, you can graph sine and cosine. You want to make sure if you're doing that you're in radian mode. And also, when you go, you need to hit zoom. There's a zoom to do. On F, we'll start with sine. Okay. So F, it's just F of theta is like F of x equals sine of theta. And our output, the y, is sine of theta. And remember, sine, when you're figuring out what the sine value look at table of things we're going to fit. Pi over 6. That's this line right here. What is sine of pi over 6? 1/2. And in your calculator, if you square root of 3 over 2. And that is, it'll help if you have a decimal when you were graphing it. Square root of graphing it at pi over 6, it's 1/2. Pi over 3, 0.866 is about right here. Pi over sine of 2 pi over 3 is square root of 3 over 2. Sine of 5 pi over 6 is 1/2. Sine of pi negative 1. And then I'm just going to go through and finish filling this. We'd have negative square root of 3 over 2. Negative. And back to 0. is one cycle, and really I should have started with 0. It would be at 0. This is one cycle of the sine graph. So a sine graph, the cycle it starts at, it crosses through the origin. Function mark, period. A cycle in trig is called a period. Alright, so we're going to talk about more vocabulary, more parts. A midline. Horizontal line that's halfway through. So you kind of look at where your max and min are and figure out where the middle is on those. And in just a normal sine graph, maximum is 0, 1, and negative 1. Then there's something called the amplitude. So in this, my amplitude in this I go to 2 pi. So my period from 0 as you have fractions over the reciprocal is 2. So if it's already a fraction, you kind of just that's through the so x is again, but when we're graphing it, we're looking at the value units. over 2. 2 pi over 3. It's negative 1/2. Half. So this is one period of these out. So if just at a quick, they look the same, but it's like if you're looking at the y-axis, cosine, the heel top is over here, is right here. Sine, it's like going down through. So on a larger scale, on an extended scale, it's kind of like they're just shift over, which is really what it is. It's a translation. Okay. So again, the midline, these are all going to be the same. This is the midline. The amplitude, I'm trying to match my colors. The amplitude is just this distance right here, which happens to be 1. The period, and you can start when you're like looking at the beginning and ending of a cycle, you can really start anywhere. It's easier like to count it if you start at 0, but you can really do it anywhere. And then the frequency is 1 over that. So vocabulary, I don't even know if I'm saying this right. Sinusoidal? Sinusoidal? I need to look and see how to pronounce that. You think that's just referring to sine, but it's actually referring to sine or cosine. So any graph like sine or cosine that goes up and down like this. So if you see this terminology, you just knowing it's talking about sine or cosine graph. Okay. Cosine is considered that because really it's sine that's just shifted over. So now let's look at some graphs, and we're going to figure out all of these parts. So we have not actually talked about specific transformations, but different transformations can shift it up, down, stretch it out. So like this one looks more stretched, whereas this one looks like it's pushed together more. Those are different transformations that will occur. For right now, we're just going to pull out period, frequency, midline, and amplitude. So period, if I start here and I go down, so that's, I'm going to end about right there. Do you agree that when I, like where I stopped highlighting, what's left is that same thing? So that's one period right there. It's kind of one full cycle before you started repeating the pattern again. So if I started at 0 and ended at pi, what's my period? Not 1 pi. Your period is pi. So what is my frequency going to be? It's going to be, it's 1 over your period. So it's 1 over pi. The midline, so if I think about my lowest point is at 0, my highest is at 6. So what's halfway between there? 3. So my midline is right here. And we put y equals 3. By putting y equals, that signifies that it's a full line. If you just put 3, that's really just a point that's at 3. Good. All right, and then the amplitude is from here to here. So what is the amplitude? It's from your midline to the peak or to the bottom. So from 3 to 6. How many is that? 3. So your amplitude is 3. All right, this next one, start with the period. So I'm kind of starting at the top of a peak, and I go down, and then I'm back at the top again. So that would be one cycle. And you can see it's like it repeats itself. So what is my period? Pi over 2. If you already have a fraction, your frequency, you're really just flipping the fraction. 2 over pi. If you think about that up here, pi is really pi over 1, right? You can put anything over 1, so you flip the fraction, 1 over pi. That's what that is. All right. My highest peak goes up to 3. My bottom goes down to -1. So what's halfway between those two? What's halfway between 3 and -1? 1, yep. So y equals 1. And then my frequency is the distance from the peak to the midline or the midline down. How many units is that? 2. Now this next one, we're not looking at a graph, we're given some points. And so I'm kind of we're gonna have to like sketch it out just a little bit and think about it a little bit more. So we have a function, it has a maximum at pi 8. So up here at the top is pi 8, and down here is 3 pi -2. So if we look back at a previous example, from one maximum to a minimum, is that my whole period? If I go from here to here, is that my entire period? It's not. Like my pink that I've highlighted for my period extends more. From one maximum to a minimum, it's half of your period. So maximum to minimum, or vice versa, is half of the period. So if I'm going from pi to 3 pi, I've only traveled half of my period. Well, what is it from pi to 3 pi? So from pi to 3 pi, how many pi's have I traveled? 2 pi. And so to find my whole period, I'm going to do 2 times 2 pi, which is 4 pi. So from here to here, you travel 2 pi. but that's only half of it. Which means the frequency is just 1 over 4 pi. All right, the midline, so we need to find, we're looking at the y values here. So halfway between 8 and -2 is what? Well, there's, okay, so there's, it's 5 units. So yeah, so there's 10 total units between the two. So halfway would be 5 units apart. And so 5 units from 8 is actually 3. So your midline is y equals 3. Your amplitude, that's what's going to be 5. So the number of units, so if you count down 5 from 8, you're going to be at the 3 mark. And then if you count down 5 more, you're going to be at the -2 mark. So it's 5 units get you to the -3. 5 units get you to the -2. So the amplitude is the number of units. The midline is the actual number that you land on when you've counted those units. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes they're different. Okay. Now we're going to look at this clock example again. So we're going to read through it again. The figure shows a large clock mounted to a vertical wall. The clock has an 8-inch long moving minute hand. So this line right here is 8 inches. The center of the clock is 120 inches above the floor. So from here straight down is 120. Okay. So I like to make a t-table first. So we're looking at time and we're looking at height. So when t is 0, at t is 0, the minute hand is pointed directly up to the 12. So what is the height at that mark? The tip top of the minute hand. It's what? 128. Very good. Okay. Now it tells us the clock is not working properly, so it's not going to take 60 minutes to get around. It's only going to take 30 minutes. So back here when I'm at 30 minutes, it's going to be back at 128. Okay. And so then I like to think, okay, well, halfway between. So halfway between that is at 15 minutes. So at 15 minutes, it's actually down here. What is the height at 15 minutes? 112, yeah. Because the tip is going to be 8 below the center. Okay. And then you've got these two half marks. So that would be 7.5 minutes. It's going to be right over here, which is the same distance that the center is. So 120, that's also halfway between 112 and 128. And then 22.5 is also 120. And this continues, like you could keep counting. So basically I'm counting up 7.5 minutes and then counting 8 inches. So like it would be 37.5 would be back at 120. And then 45, So let's see. This would be the 120. It would be 112. And then you could keep going. 52.5 would be back up at the 120. So you see how it goes 128, 120, 112, and then it comes back 120, 128. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And so when you are filling out your curve, you want to keep in mind that F and P are your highest, J is your lowest. So sometimes, a lot of times, you will start out with your first one up here at F, but it's not guaranteed. So you're going to pick out kind of two of the highest ones. So the 128s, that's going to be your F and P. And I mean, like, I feel like all of the practice things that we've gotten have had this type of question on it, which is a good thing for you all. Like, you're seeing the same type of question. You know what to expect. You know how to approach it, at least. So the F would be the 0, 128. G would be the 7.5, 120. J is the lowest, so the 15, 112. 22.5, 120. So notice everything in this middle has a Y value of 120. P would be the 30, 128. So it kind of helps to mark this like an X and Y axis kind of. So like this is at 0, this is 7.5, that's 15, 22.5, 30. And then this right here is 112, 120, 128. So you can see everything like on this top line, all the points are at 128, 120, 112, and then you don't have any more that line up this way, but they go in increments of 7.5. All right, so we're going to find the period, the frequency, the amplitude, and the midline. All right, so period, you can start counting. I think it makes sense to start counting at the F and trace until I'm back at the hilltop, which would be up until P. So from 0, so your period, you are looking at your X's. So period, look at the X values basically. So from 0 to 30, what's that length? 30. Yep, from 0 to 30, travel 30. Which means that the amplitude is just 1 over 30. The midline, you're really looking at the Y values. So it's Y equals 120. That's the one in the middle. And then the frequency, what's your frequency? What's your frequency? You're looking at the Y's. So what's the difference between 128 and 120? 8. Your frequency is 8. No, I got those mixed up, didn't I? Yeah, I labeled those wrong. That's your amplitude, that's your frequency. Sorry. I've got to get used to these. I had to go back and reteach myself this. I haven't seen this probably since I was in high school. So you'll have to watch out because I'll probably do that a lot. Your period and frequency go together. Your midline and amplitude kind of go together. right, find two intervals where the graph is both decreasing and concave up. So decreasing and concave up. So really what I have, when you think concave up, I really would like a blank one. When you think about concave up and concave down, it kind of stops halfway. That's concave down. That's concave up. That's concave down. And then it kind of switches. It would go back up like this. Like that. Okay. So from point G to J, that section right there is considered concave up, and it's decreasing. If you look from F to G, that would be in the concave down. That's part of the frown. So you have a frown, that meets a smile. That meets a frown, that meets a smile. Okay, so the concave up, you're looking at just the smile part. So, and when you write an interval, we're not writing G to J. We're writing the X values. So it starts at 7.5 and goes to 15. So that's one of the intervals. Because we know this pattern continues, we're really looking, we want to know from here to here. That would be another decreasing and concave up. So what would the X value be right here? 37.5. And then the X value down here would be 45.